The evening was serene, a calm painting of pink and orange hues reflected in the glassy surface of the Pasadena lake. A gentle wind rustled through the leaves of the sparse trees that peppered the town's outskirts. It was the kind of tranquility that Sheriff Jack Holliday had sought after the blood and fury of war. His sun-weathered skin and the gray streaks in his hair were both testaments to the life he'd lived, a life he hoped to leave behind. Yet as he watched the town from his modest sheriff's office, something gnawed at the pit of his stomach, an unnerving sense of impending doom. He shrugged it off as the remnants of old war wounds, both physical and psychological. He sipped his lukewarm coffee, letting the bitter taste ground him back to reality. This was Pasadena, not some godforsaken, war-torn nation. His peace was broken by a loud crash that shook the ground beneath him. The sound echoed off the nearby factories and industrial buildings, reverberating through the bones of the town. Jack sprang to his feet, his instinct kicking in. He was out the door in a heartbeat, driving towards the sound in his rusted police cruiser, siren wailing against the quiet backdrop of the Texas night. As he drove, he noticed a plume of smoke billowing towards the sky on the horizon. His grip tightened around the steering wheel. The smoke, against the backdrop of the evening sun, created an eerie image that sent a chill down his spine. He pulled up at the edge of a large impact crater. He stepped out of the cruiser, a .38 special clutched in his steady hands. It was a scene straight from a science fiction movie. An object, charred and smoky, lay in the center of the crater. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Not a plane, not a satellite. It was alien. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the object. Each step echoed in the silent night, the only sounds being the distant hum of the town and his own steady breaths. His fingers brushed against the surface of the object. It was cold, smoother than any material he knew. His mind raced, churning with questions. What was this? Where did it come from? His time in the Navy hadn't prepared him for this. Nothing could. He looked up, noticing for the first time the complete silence that had fallen over the area. No birds, no insects, just the sound of his own breath. It was as if nature itself held its breath in the presence of the strange object. Before he could ponder more, his radio crackled to life, breaking the eerie silence.
Sheriff Holliday, come in. You there, Jack?
It was Maggie, the dispatcher.
Roger that, Maggie,
he responded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't take his eyes off the object.
Jack, folks are scared. Phone lines are buzzing. They heard the crash, saw the smoke. What's going on?
He hesitated, taking one last look at the enigmatic object.
Not sure yet, Mags, but tell him to stay put. I'll handle it.
The words were spoken with a false bravado he didn't feel. For the first time in a long time, Jack Holliday was unsure. Something had landed in Pasadena, something beyond his understanding. But he was the sheriff, the town's protector. He would face this unknown, just as he had faced the horrors of war. Little did he know the war was just beginning. The following days brought about a chilling unease in Pasadena. Murmurs of the mysterious object permeated every corner of the town, from the diner to the town's old church. Jack found himself amidst a whirlwind of questions he had no answers to. The object remained where it had landed, cordoned off as the military and federal agencies promised to handle it. But the crash wasn't the only anomaly disturbing the tranquility of Pasadena. People started disappearing. First, it was Old Man Jenkins, the reclusive widower who lived on the outskirts of town. Then, the Thompson twins didn't show up at school. Panic seeped into the town like a slow, insidious poison. Jack, along with his small team, was stretched thin, trying to maintain a semblance of order. Jack spent his days patrolling the town, answering panicked phone calls, and his nights driving past the increasingly desolate homes of the missing people. Each vacant house was a stark reminder of the growing problem, a problem he was ill-equipped to solve. In the midst of this, he found himself drawn back to the crash site, the place where the tranquility of his town had been shattered. The military had set up a makeshift camp around the object, their activities hidden behind the fences and armed guards. Each visit increased his frustration, the condescending reassurances of the federal agents doing nothing to ease his worries. Jack knew the town, its people, and he knew something was profoundly wrong. He didn't believe in coincidences, and the missing folks and the alien object were surely connected. As he drove away from the site one evening, he caught sight of a solitary figure near the lake. He recognized her instantly. Dr. Emma Lawson. She was a puzzle, an enigma that had landed in their town a few years ago with her fancy degrees and far-off gaze. He parked his cruiser and walked towards her, a peculiar sense of relief washing over him. In a town spiraling into chaos, Emma remained a constant, lost in her world of stars and galaxies. He often envied her for that.
"Evening, Doc,"
he greeted as he approached her. She was fiddling with a large telescope, her brows furrowed in concentration.
"Sheriff Holiday,"
she acknowledged without taking her eyes off the device. After a moment, she straightened up and glanced at him.
"I heard about the missing people."
Jack nodded, his gaze falling on the tranquil lake.
5 in 3 days. The town's scared, Doc.
He could see her calculating mind at work as she processed the information. Then she turned to her telescope, adjusting the lens.
"I heard about the crash too,"
she said, her tone casual. Too casual. Jack raised an eyebrow, looking at her in surprise. She continued to adjust her telescope, finally seeming satisfied. She moved back, gesturing for him to take a look. Hesitant, he stepped forward, peering into the eyepiece. The object was in clear view, its sleek, otherworldly surface shining under the setting sun. He felt a shiver of dread run down his spine as he looked at it. An alien object in his town, the symbol of his worst fears. He stepped back, glancing at Emma. She was watching him, her green eyes serious.
"I've been picking up strange signals since it crashed,"
she confessed.
"I think it's connected, Jack. The disappearances, the object. We might be facing something extraterrestrial."
The finality of her words sent a chill down his spine. He felt the weight of his badge against his chest, the duty it symbolized. He was the protector of the town, and now he had to confront the unknown. He turned his gaze back to the mysterious object, its image reflected in the calm waters of the lake. The once serene town of Pasadena was on the brink of an unimaginable nightmare, and he was standing right at the precipice.
"Then we better figure out what we're dealing with, Doc,"
he said, a grim resolve hardening his features. The ordinary town sheriff was about to face an extraordinary threat, and he had no choice but to meet it head-on. In the heart of Pasadena, nestled between the town's clinic and the school, was the old St. Jude's Church. Father Michael, its shepherd for 3 decades, had borne witness to the town's joys and sorrows, baptisms and funerals, weddings and confessions. He was a man of faith, a faith tested now more than ever. The disappearances had the whole town on edge, and the church had become a refuge for many seeking solace. Father Michael shouldered their fear and uncertainty, offering words of comfort despite the growing dread within him. One evening, as the sun was painting the sky in shades of orange, Sheriff Holiday walked into the church. Father Michael noticed the worry lines etched deeper into Jack's forehead, the tension in his broad shoulders. Jack was not a regular at St. Jude S. His faith had been lost somewhere in the battlefield long ago, and yet here he was, his presence betraying the gravity of the situation. "Sheriff," Father Michael greeted him, his voice echoing in the near-empty church.
"Father,"
Jack nodded, taking a seat in the front pew. He was silent for a while, as if collecting his thoughts. "What brings you here, Jack?" Father Michael asked, sitting next to him. Jack ran a hand through his graying hair, his gaze fixed on the large wooden cross adorning the church.
"I'm not sure, Father,"
he admitted.
"This town's in chaos, people are scared, and I can't shake off this feeling of dread."
Father Michael studied the sheriff, the burden he was carrying. The church was meant to be a symbol of hope, but what could it offer when the threat was of unknown origin? "I've been having dreams, Sheriff," Father Michael confessed. "Apocalyptic visions of our town, our people consumed by something unnatural, something unholy." The confession hung heavily in the air between them, an unlikely alliance forming amidst the crisis. The faithless sheriff and the fearful priest, both grappling with the unknown. Outside the church, the world was quickly spinning out of control. Emma Lawson was knee-deep in signals and frequencies, each more perplexing than the last. Her lab was filled with scribbled papers and coffee cups, a telltale sign to her relentless pursuit of answers. She was often solitary, preferring the company of stars and telescopes, but even she could feel the collective fear looming over Pasadena. The strange object had become the focal point of her investigation. She spent hours observing it, tracking its signals. A pattern had begun to emerge, a sort of pulsating rhythm that felt unnervingly alive. Emma was certain it was a form of communication, a chilling message from an alien entity. She shared her findings with Jack when he paid her a visit. Her lab was a stark contrast to the organized chaos of the sheriff's office, filled with complicated machinery and star charts. She showed him the signals, the repeating pattern, her theories about the alien object. Jack listened, his worry lines deepening with every revelation. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, the enormity of the situation settling in. Jack left with a heavy heart, the image of the pulsating signals etched into his mind. He drove back to the sheriff's office, the quiet town around him cloaked in an impending doom. That night, Pasadena fell into an uneasy sleep, the mystery of the alien object hanging over it like a grim shadow. The once vibrant town was losing its colors, succumbing to the fear of the unknown. Jack Holliday, Emma Lawson, and Father Michael were in the eye of the storm, each confronting the crisis in their own way. The alien entity remained a silent observer, its pulsating signals the only hint of the chilling horror that was about to unfold. The people of Pasadena, their world teetering on the edge of darkness, could only brace for what was coming. With the sun rising the next day, a silent gloom seeped into the crevices of the town. The ordinarily bustling diner was mostly deserted, save for a few weary souls seeking solace in steaming cups of coffee. The sheriff's office was awash with activity, the ringing phones a harsh reminder of the growing panic. Jack Holliday, a robust figure of strength and security, had been reduced to a harrowed vessel of worry. The number of missing people had risen to 12. The fear was palpable, a ghastly specter haunting every street, every home. On the outskirts of town, in a cabin overlooking the lake, Emma Lawson wrestled with the signals. They'd grown stronger, more persistent. The pulsating rhythm felt like a heartbeat, the life force of the alien entity making its presence known. Jack arrived at her cabin early in the day, a map of Pasadena in his hands. Together, they tried to correlate the locations of the disappearances with the frequency of the signals. The task was daunting, the results inconclusive, but it was a start. Amid the fear and uncertainty, they found a common ground, an unexpected partnership. In the evening, Jack was called to the church. Father Michael had found something unusual. The priest led him to the church's basement, a dusty, forgotten place filled with old records and relics. Among them was an ancient text, a chronicle of the town's history spanning centuries. What Father Michael revealed sent a shiver down Jack's spine. There were accounts from the early settlers, tales of disappearances and strange sightings. They were dismissed as folk tales, but now, with the alien object and missing people, they took on a more sinister connotation. An old sketch depicted an object remarkably similar to the one that had crashed. Jack left the church, the weight of the discovery hanging heavily on him. Was it possible that they were not the first ones to encounter the entity? The thought was unsettling. That night, the quiet was shattered by an unearthly sound. It started as a low hum, rising gradually into a high-pitched wail that echoed through the town. Lights flickered, car alarms went off, and the people of Pasadena were jolted from their sleep. The sound seemed to emanate from the alien object. The military camp was thrown into chaos, soldiers scrambling to determine the cause. Emma Lawson, listening to the sound from her cabin, recognized it instantly. It was the same frequency she had been observing, amplified and twisted into a chilling scream. A sense of dread washed over her. The alien entity was no longer passive. The horrifying realization struck her. The sound was not just a signal, it was a call. In the heart of the town, Jack Holliday received frantic calls, his town now in the grip of an alien horror. He knew he had to act, to protect his people, but how does one fight an unseen, unheard enemy? The sound ended abruptly, leaving a disquieting silence in its wake. Pasadena, under the veil of darkness, was a town under siege. Its protector, Sheriff Jack Holliday, felt an immense responsibility. But standing against the alien threat, he also felt an overpowering fear. His town, his people were on the brink of a dark abyss, and he was their last line of defense. The sinister dance with the alien entity had begun in earnest. It was no longer a question of if, but when the entity would make its next move. The people of Pasadena, tangled in a terrifying ordeal, held their breath, waiting for the inevitable. For the first time in his life, Sheriff Holiday was unsure if he could protect his town, his home, from the alien horror that had descended upon them. The sun rose over Pasadena, casting long, somber shadows over the sleeping town. It was a new day, but the chilling echoes of the alien call from the previous night hung in the air, an ominous portent of things to come. Emma Lawson was already awake, her tired eyes staring at the spectral analysis of the alien sound. It was haunting, the chaotic cacophony now revealing intricate patterns, oscillations that felt unnaturally precise. There was intelligence behind it, something aware and sentient. As Emma delved deeper, a chilling possibility dawned upon her. The signal was not just a call, but could be a command. A countdown, each pulse a ticking clock towards an unknown event. At the sheriff's office, Jack was staring at a map of Pasadena, each red dot marking a disappearance. They clustered around the crash site, radiating outwards, an insidious sprawl of dread. He was piecing together a grim jigsaw, each piece pulling him further into the abyss. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock. Father Michael stood at the doorway, holding a weathered book. It was the town's chronicle, filled with cryptic sketches and old tales. He had found another entry, a forgotten tale of a dark winter when the town had been on the brink of devastation, much like now. In the tale, a wise woman had claimed to commune with the alien entity, understanding its desires. She described it as a consumer of life, a devourer of worlds. As Jack read the account, he felt a chill crawl up his spine. Was their town destined to be consumed? Meanwhile, the military was preparing for the worst. Soldiers patrolled the streets. A perimeter was established around the town, cutting Pasadena off from the outside world. The town was now a ticking time bomb, its fate intertwined with the alien entity's next move. At dusk, Jack found himself at Emma's cabin. He relayed Father Michael's discovery, the Chronicle's tales, the woman who claimed to understand the alien entity. Emma, still engrossed in the signals, paused and looked up at him. They sat in silence, processing the implications. Emma returned to her work, her hands tracing the pattern of the alien signal. The rhythm was hypnotic, a symphony of cosmic horror. Each pulse was a second closer to an event, an unknown catastrophe. That's when she realized the signal wasn't just a countdown. It was also a locator. The entity wasn't just calling, it was guiding others to them. The realization was a blow, a dreadful piece of the puzzle falling into place. They were not only on a ticking clock, but at the epicenter of a coming storm. Emma shared her findings with Jack, the weight of their discovery turning the room cold. Outside, the sun had set, the quiet town now wrapped in the shroud of night. An eerie calm had descended, the silence before the storm. Jack and Emma sat in the cabin, their minds racing with the grim truth. The alien entity had woven a terrifying web around Pasadena, and they were at its center. That night, Pasadena slept in the grip of an alien terror. The reality of their situation was sinking in, the fear becoming tangible. The countdown was on, each passing moment bringing them closer to the event horizon. Jack Holiday and Emma Lawson, unlikely partners in this ordeal, were now the town's only hope against the encroaching darkness. Unseen by them, in the cold depths of space, the first of the summoned were beginning their descent. A pall of unease had fallen over Pasadena, a suffocating blanket of fear. The townsfolk whispered of shadows moving in the night, of ghostly sounds, of nightmares that wouldn't end when they woke. The world they knew was being slowly unmade, replaced by an alien terror. In the isolation of her cabin, Emma Lawson had traced the signal to its source. But what she found made her blood run cold. The signal was drawing something towards them from the cold depths of space, an entity far more colossal than the vessel in the town center. In the town center, the military were tense, their faces betraying the strain. There was a sense of the inevitable, a feeling of an impending storm. Whispers floated among them of the disappearances, of the alien signal, of the unknown that lurked in the shadows. At the sheriff's office, Jack Holliday stared at the Chronicle, its ancient pages filled with dread. Father Michael's account of the wise woman who had faced the entity in the past was haunting him. Her words, "a consumer of life, a devourer of worlds," echoed in his mind. A chill ran down his spine as he connected the dots, the truth revealing itself in a terrifying vision. His fear turned to determination. He would not let Pasadena fall to this cosmic horror. With renewed vigor, he sought Emma. Their combined knowledge was the only weapon they had. Meanwhile, in the seclusion of her cabin, Emma tracked the alien signal, her heart pounding in her chest. As she followed the pulsating rhythm, the locator coordinates pointed to a horrifying truth. The first of the summoned had arrived. She found Jack at her doorstep, his face etched with worry. They shared their findings, their theories converging on a nightmarish conclusion. The summoned entity had arrived and was hidden somewhere in town, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Armed with this knowledge, Jack and Emma turned to the military. They presented their findings to Captain Anderson, the raw fear apparent in their voices. The captain, a man who had faced countless battles, blanched at their words. The reality of their predicament sunk in. This was a war unlike any he had fought before. Without wasting time, a town-wide search was initiated. Every home, every alley, every corner was scoured for signs of the alien entity. The tension was high, the air heavy with the fear of the unknown. In the dead of night, beneath the hollow gaze of the alien vessel, the ground began to tremble. A low hum vibrated through the air, matching the frequency of the alien signal. Emma, standing at a distance, recognized it instantly. The entity was about to reveal itself. Then it emerged. From the shadows of the lake, a colossal figure materialized. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its form fluctuating, a being of pure energy and darkness. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the alien signal. The sight was terrifying. The military opened fire, but their weapons were useless against it. The entity moved, its form flowing like water, consuming everything in its path. Pasadena was plunged into darkness, its heart now home to an alien entity. Jack and Emma could only watch, the horror unfolding before their eyes, surpassing their darkest fears. The once peaceful town of Pasadena was now a theater of chaos and destruction. The alien entity had revealed itself, a living shadow that abs-vesseled life and light. Its mere presence was an affront to their reality, a perversion of natural order. Jack Holliday stood amidst the chaos, his resolve tested like never before. His gaze fell on the pulsating entity, a beast from beyond their realm. Emma stood next to him, her eyes reflecting the alien horror. They had known something was coming, but the magnitude of their plight was beyond comprehension. The military was powerless. Bullets and grenades passed through the entity, their energy abs-vesseled, their matter disintegrated. The entity moved unhindered, its dark form gliding over the buildings, swallowing them into its mass. Panic was rampant, the screams of the townsfolk echoing through the night. Jack mobilized his officers, directing the evacuation. His voice was the anchor in the storm. His only hope was to get as many people to safety as possible. Meanwhile, Emma was locked in her cabin, her hands shaking as she tried to decipher the alien signal. She felt a connection, an understanding with the entity. The patterns, the pulses, the signals, they were all pieces of a grand cosmic puzzle. She was their translator, their only hope of communicating with the entity. The evacuation was chaotic. Families were separated, homes abandoned, their lives reduced to frightened whispers and desperate prayers. In the town center, Captain Anderson faced the entity, his men falling back, their weapons useless. He could only watch as the entity continued its destructive march, a tide of darkness swallowing their world. As the night wore on, the entity moved closer to the town center, drawn to the alien vessel. Emma, watching from her cabin, realized the horrifying truth. The vessel was not just a beacon, but a portal, a gateway to their world. The entity was not the only one coming. It was the harbinger, the first of many. She relayed her discovery to Jack, her voice a mix of fear and urgency. The implications were damning. The entity was just the beginning. More would come, each one potentially more devastating than the last. With this knowledge, Jack made a desperate decision. They had to destroy the vessel. It was their only chance to close the portal, to halt the incoming tide of alien horrors. Emma argued against it, fearful of the potential repercussions. The vessel was their only source of understanding the alien entity. Destroying it could anger the entity further or even accelerate the arrivals. But Jack was adamant. They had no other option. In the face of impending annihilation, Jack and Captain Anderson mobilized a desperate plan. A cache of explosives was collected, their intent to shatter the alien vessel and stop the signals coming from it. The mission was suicidal, but it was their only chance. As the dawn approached, the town of Pasadena was unrecognizable, its peace replaced by terror, its tranquility by chaos. The entity had woven a tapestry of horror, and they were mere threads in its cosmic design. The day of reckoning was upon them. Their plan was set into motion, the town holding its breath. Jack and Captain Anderson made their way to the town center, the vessel pulsating ominously, the entity looming over it. Their hearts pounded in their chests, the fate of their town in their hands. The first light of dawn found Pasadena in ruins, a grim reflection of the horror that had unfolded. The entity had spread, its dark form looming ominously over the town center. The countdown to their annihilation was ticking away with relentless certainty. Emma watched the sunrise from her cabin, the orange hue painting the sky with an eerie calmness. The dread she felt was immeasurable, her nerves frayed at the edges. She knew what was at stake. Her hands shook as she reached for the transmitter. She had to try one last time to communicate with the entity. In the town center, Jack and Captain Anderson stood before the alien vessel, the pulsating energy filling the air with static. Jack felt the weight of their decision. They were on a precipice, their next steps defining their fate. They began their operation. Carefully, the explosives were placed around the vessel. The vessel seemed to sense the impending threat, its pulsations intensifying. The energy it emitted grew stronger, a sign that their time was running out. The entity watched, its form flickering as if responding to the vessel. From her cabin, Emma tapped into the frequency of the entity, her voice trembling as she sent her message. She tried to explain, to plead, to reason. Her words echoed into the void, her plea falling into the cosmic silence. Back in the town center, the explosives were set. The finality of their actions hung heavy in the air. Jack took one last look at the vessel, a symbol of their impending doom. With a nod to Captain Anderson, he gave the order. The countdown had begun. As the seconds ticked away, the vessel pulsed wildly, the energy waves almost tangible. The entity stirred, its form swirling, reacting to the impending destruction. The tension was unbearable, the air charged with anticipation. Then the explosion erupted, a bright flash that lit up the town. The ground shook as the shockwave rippled through. The vessel shattered, fragments raining down. The silence that followed was deafening. In the aftermath, Jack and Captain Anderson stood amidst the wreckage, the alien vessel destroyed. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. The entity roared, its form fluctuating violently, the shock of the vessel's destruction echoing through its being. From her cabin, Emma heard the explosion. She watched as the entity writhed, its form expanding. A sinking feeling of dread washed over her. The entity was not deterred. It was enraged. As the entity grew, it consumed more, its energy hungering for life. Houses, trees, cars. They were all swallowed, their existence erased. The townsfolk watched in horror as their world was consumed by the alien entity. Jack and Captain Anderson realized their mistake. The destruction of the vessel had not halted the entity. Instead, it had provoked it, accelerating its destruction. The realization was a punch to the gut. Their hope turned into despair. As the entity spread, Jack made a desperate call to Emma. Their plan had failed. They needed another way to stop the entity. Emma, in her despair, knew of none. The entity was beyond their understanding, a cosmic horror that defied their logic. Their desperation was palpable. The town was being consumed, the entity unstoppable. The dawn of their annihilation was upon them, the nightmare a reality. The once peaceful town of Pasadena was on the brink, their fight for survival seemingly futile. Pasadena was a town on the edge of oblivion. The once vibrant community now a playground for an otherworldly entity. The monster loomed ominously over the ruins, its darkness consuming everything it touched. Emma sat alone in her cabin, surrounded by screens filled with incomprehensible alien patterns. Her brain was fried from relentless efforts to comprehend the alien signals, but she had nothing to show for it, no revelations, no solutions. All she had was an escalating sense of dread. Meanwhile, Jack and Captain Anderson were at the center of the town, staring at the remnants of the vessel. Their attempt to halt the entity's destructive march had failed spectacularly. Instead, their actions had expedited the alien nightmare. Emma was on the brink of giving up when an idea struck her. A pattern she had overlooked, a signal embedded within the alien communication. She realized they had been trying to communicate, not with them, but with the entity. The vessel was a containment device, not a portal. Its destruction had freed the entity, allowed it to grow uncontrolled. With newfound determination, Emma worked tirelessly to decipher the signal. It was their last hope, a slim chance to communicate with the entity and hopefully stop its rampage. Simultaneously, Jack, Captain Anderson, and the townsfolk prepared for their last stand. They had no weapons that could harm the entity, but they were determined to defend their town to the very end. As the night crept in, the entity grew restless. It started to move towards the remaining populated area, its hunger for life energy unabated. The townsfolk watched in horror as the living nightmare drew nearer. Emma was running out of time. Her brain was working overtime, her fingers flying over the keys as she struggled to decipher the alien signal. Finally, she broke through. The signal was a control sequence, a command designed to rein the entity. Without wasting a second, she transmitted the decoded signal towards the entity. She watched with bated breath as the entity reacted, its form fluctuating violently. At the town center, Jack and the rest of the townsfolk braced themselves as the entity roared. It was a sound that reverberated through their bodies. The entity convulsed, its form growing erratic. Emma watched as the entity recoiled, its rampage momentarily halted. She continued to transmit the signal, her determination unwavering. Suddenly, the entity shrieked, a sound that ripped through the silence of the night. Its form began to shrink, the shadows it had consumed being expelled. Slowly, the entity was being contained, forced back into a smaller form. The townsfolk watched in disbelief as the entity shrank, their world slowly being returned to them. The sense of relief was overwhelming, their impending doom averted. But the celebration was cut short by the entity's final roar. In its death throes, it lashed out one last time, a wave of dark energy heading straight for the town center. In the heart-stopping moment, Jack shielded Captain Anderson, their fate seemingly sealed. But before the wave could hit, it dispersed, the entity finally succumbing to the alien command. Silence descended upon Pasadena, the horror of the night replaced with stunned relief. They had survived, their town spared from total annihilation. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, they took a moment to appreciate their victory. It was a hard-fought battle, one that had pushed them to their limits. But they had emerged victorious, their spirit unbroken. The nightmare was over, the alien horror vanquished. But their town bore the scars of the night, a grim reminder of the alien horror they had faced. As they stood amidst the ruins, they knew that their lives would never be the same. The dawn of a new day brought with it a sense of surreal calm. The once throbbing heart of Pasadena was now a ghost town, the silence only punctuated by the occasional distant rumble of debris settling. The entity was gone, and in its wake it left a battered town and its traumatized inhabitants. Emma sat exhausted in her cabin, her fingers still resting on the keys of the transmitter. The screens around her flickered aimlessly, the alien signals replaced with static. She had done it. She had saved her town. A sense of relief washed over her, coupled with an overwhelming exhaustion. Her eyes felt heavy, and as the adrenaline of the night ebbed away, she found herself drifting into sleep. At the town center, Jack and Captain Anderson emerged from the dust and debris. They looked at each other, their faces lined with fatigue and relief. Around them, the townsfolk started to gather, their faces a mirror of the disbelief and relief that Jack and Captain Anderson felt. In the days that followed, Pasadena slowly began to rebuild. The streets once filled with terror and destruction started to show signs of life. The townsfolk worked together, their shared experience of the nightmare fostering a sense of unity that was stronger than ever. Emma was hailed as the hero of Pasadena, her efforts to decode the alien signal celebrated. But she bore the title with a heavy heart. She had saved her town, but at what cost? The memories of the entity and the horror it wrought haunted her. She found solace in her work, her focus shifting to understanding the alien signal and the civilization that sent it. Hey sci-fi horror fans, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you to all our official supporters of the channel. Craving another scary story? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone. And remember, stay cosmic.